I'd like to thank you all for being here, for those of you who are logged on. This is the first of a 12-part series on preventing domestic violence among people with disabilities. It was funded by a grant from the Verizon Foundation, and the sign language interpreter was made possible by a grant from the Stalking Foundation. And we have one is Samantha Thomas, Outreach Coordinator for the Domestic Violence Initiative, who will provide information and tools for self-sufficiency that supports safe and fulfilling lives free of violence and abuse. And then we are going to have Erica Olsen, Housing and Technology Safety Specialist on for the National Network to End Domestic Violence. So at this point, I want to thank everyone for being here, everyone who helped to make this possible, Callum McCullough in our office, and all the people behind the scenes. Thank you so much for being here and for being a part of this. Samantha, I'm going to turn this over to you at this point.
Thank you so much, Roxanne. Again, my name is Samantha Thomas. I'm the Outreach Coordinator for a Domestic Violence Initiative servicing women, men, and children with disabilities. Our organization has been established since 1985, providing direct services to victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and caregiver abuse. And all of our victims are victims with disabilities. But what we want to discuss today, let's start with the question of trying to answer what is abuse and what is domestic violence. Domestic violence is a pattern of escalating abusive behavior from one partner to another in an intimate relationship. It happens when there is control by one partner over another in an intimate relationship, and that's key to remembering the intimate relationship. Now, there are many types of abuse. On the slide, you'll notice that there is a list of just a very few. There's physical abuse. Examples of that would be kicking, punching, shoving, slapping, pushing, and any other acts which hurt your body. There's the sexual abuse, calling you vulgar names, criticizing your body parts or your sensuality, or forced or pressure, including rape. Assaults against your self-esteem, name-calling, and the assaults against your self-esteem would be the emotional abuse. The verbal would be name-calling, threats put down. Then there's the psychological, causing you to feel as if you are going crazy, quote-unquote. There's the spiritual abuse, attacking your spiritual or religious beliefs. There's the financial abuse that is controlling and manipulating you by threatening your economic status and basic needs. There is the homophobic abuse, where someone is being threatening to out you to those that don't know of your sexual orientation. There's even immigration abuse, using your immigration status and fear of deportation to control you. There are destructive acts, actual or threatened assault of your property or pets to secure you. So there's many, many, many different types of abuse. What I'd like to do, though, is share some facts about domestic abuse, which is also included in the slides. Fact one, almost 4 million women are beaten in their homes every year by their male partners. Although the first violent incident may not be severe, once battering begins, it tends to increase in severity and frequency, sometimes leading to permanent injury or death. What may begin as an occasional slap or shove eventually can turn into pushing down the stairs, a punch in the face, kick in the stomach, slapping is very, very common. Battering is not about anger or losing control. It is an intentional choice focused on maintaining power and control in the relationship. So there's always that issue of power and control. The batterer is responsible for the violence, not the victim. Oftentimes, many victims believe they're at fault because it's something that they may have done or may have said or didn't do, but it's never the victim's fault. It's never your fault if you're a victim. People are beaten for breaking in an egg yolk while fixing breakfast, for wearing their hair a certain way, dressing nicely. None of those things are your fault. Violence does occur in same-sex relationships as well, and the issues of power and control are similar to those that we find in heterosexual relationships. So whether you are gay or straight, bisexual, abuse is abuse, and it doesn't matter what the what label you have on your relationship. Substance abuse is involved in about half of all domestic violence incidents. Although drugs or alcohol may lower a person's self-control, they do not cause violence. Batterers often use drugs or alcohol as an excuse or permission to batter and to avoid responsibility for their abuse. Because of violence inflicted upon a woman or man by their partner, they're treated much differently than violence inflicted by a stranger. Batterers are not always arrested, and I do want to add there, not only are batterers not always arrested, many times the abuse itself never goes reported. Traditionally, police are more likely to file a report if the offender was a stranger rather than an intimate partner. Now, battering itself crosses all economic, educational, ethnic, sexual orientation, age, and racial lines in equal proportions. There is no quote-unquote typical victim. And batterers generally lead normal lives except for their unwillingness to stop their violence and controlling behavior. Batterers do not batter because they're crazy or mentally ill. Now, why victims stay? Oftentimes, there's an enormous amount of reasons why victims stay, and they vary. There's no one reason greater than the other, but here are some reasons. Fear of being beaten more severely. There's threats against him or her, their life, and the lives of their family and loved ones, especially if children are involved. There's the dependence on the abuser for food, shelter, and other necessities. There's the feeling that he or she has no one to talk to or that people will not believe he or she. There's the belief that a child needs both parents in the same household. And that particular reason there, within regards to the child needing both parents in the household, is extremely common. Religious commitment reasons is another reason why a victim might choose to stay. Fear of not being able to care for him or herself or his or her child. Threats of suicide by the abuser. The belief that things will get better. The belief that no one else can love you. Fear of family and friends becoming ashamed of his or her if they leave. That feeling of embarrassment, shame, and humiliation, like, oh my God, my mother or father was right, or my neighbor was right, or my friend was right. This was going to happen. And so there's that immediate guilt and shame and abuse with that, that self-abuse that we do. That self-loathing begins to happen. Fear that others will think that you're stupid for becoming involved in an abusive relationship. The thought that if the relationship doesn't work, it's your fault. And then, of course, wanting to fix the abuser, wanting to fix the perpetrator, wanting to fix the one that is causing you harm and hurting you is a huge, one of the huge reasons why victims stay as well. Now, on one of the slides, there's an example of the cycle of violence. So it starts with just an absence of violence. There's no violent behavior at all in the relationship for a period of time. And then something happens. Certain things take place. Maybe there's a financial situation. Maybe there's an issue where you can no longer pay your bills for some reason that either yourself or the perpetrator can, it's no fault to either one. So through that process, using that example, tension builds. And from that, the tension escalates. And from that, there's the explosion. when that explosion happens, there's the abuse. And that cycle of violence will continue in most cases. The factors of why victims with disabilities stay and why that cycle of violence that I just discussed continues, well, one of the factors is isolation. When you're thinking of a victim or survivor with a disability, and not just someone in a wheelchair, but any disability, you're thinking about, this partner, this perpetrator, this person that I love who's abusing me is the only one I have left. I'm afraid of being isolated. There's the lack of economic independence. I'm so afraid because this person who's been taking care of me, has been my caregiver for so long, leaves. What happens to my economic status? What happens to my ability to care for myself? There's the less defended against victimization. People with that are victims with a disability, there's a lot of stigma associated around that. There's a lot of stigma associated around a person with any sort of disability, whether it be a mental disorder, developmental disorder, psychological, so on and so forth. And unfortunately, there's the fear that they're not going to be defended against that victimization. No one will believe them. No one would think that they could comprehend enough to say, I'm being abused, or I have been abused and I need help. So again, that goes along with the fear of being believed. If you are someone with a disability and you're in a wheelchair, or you need assistance with mobility, assistance with hygiene and all of your care activities that you would do every day, that person that's abusing you might be the only one that's in your life. So there's that fear that who's going to take care of my daily bodily needs? Who's going to take care of my personal care needs? How am I going to find a personal care assistant? So there's a lot of reasons, additional reasons on top of the other factors of why a victim chooses to stay, why a victim with a disability would stay. There are tactics of abuse specific to people with disabilities who are deaf. And I believe, Erica, I'm going to turn the phone over to you.
Great. Thank you, Samantha.
Mm-hmm.
So Samantha has really talked a lot about what domestic violence and abuse can look like for individuals. And as she's already spoken about, it's really important to realize that domestic violence doesn't look that different when you're talking about the dynamics that people with disabilities experience versus dynamics when a survivor does not have a disability. But it is important to recognize that some of the tactics can be different, that people with disabilities might experience something very specific to their disability. And so on this one slide, we've kind of listed out what some of those very specific tactics could be. Some physical abuse could be withholding food, messing up with medications. We've seen a lot of that, unfortunately, where somebody tampers with somebody's medications, withholds somebody's medications on them to cause pain, to make somebody seem delirious in some way. We also see, I worked with a survivor a while back whose abuser used to change the locks in the house, and he changed all the locks so that the lock was at the top of the door. And this was a woman who used a wheelchair, and she wasn't able to access the lock. So she was basically imprisoned in her own home. But that's not necessarily a tactic that you would see with individuals that don't have disabilities. So it's important to recognize those differences. In sexual abuse, we sometimes see forced touching and intercourse, same as with individuals without disabilities, but also forced sterilization, forced abortion, really making decisions for somebody who has a disability and taking advantage of the fact that the survivor has a disability and that the abuser doesn't, so that they might be able to be listened to when trying to make medical decisions and things like that. Okay, good. again, the tactics of abuse can be a little bit different for individuals with disabilities. In terms of isolation, we often see the abuser trying to control access or breaking assistive technology devices, something I'll talk a slight bit more about in a second. Taking away somebody's service animal, again, abusing somebody's medications to make somebody sedated, things like that, harassing or firing somebody's caregiver or assistant so that the individual becomes primarily dependent on the abuser are all tactics that we see that sometimes are very specific to individuals with disabilities. Again, emotional abuse can look a little bit different in terms of one example we see a lot is disclosing the disability, telling other people about a disability. A lot of individuals have hidden disabilities that other people around them don't necessarily know about, and for many reasons don't want them known. And the abusers sometimes really use that to their advantage and disclose that without the survivor's consent. We also see abusers misusing financial control. We have a lot of cases where we've seen abusers who are the payee for individuals and try to really coerce the individual into doing things or make just unilateral decisions without consulting with the individual, their partner, or the person that they are supposed to be working on behalf of, but are instead just misusing that privilege. Exploiting the children to get custody. There was a case a while back where a woman was in an accident, and she ended up losing mobility of her legs, not permanently but temporarily. And it really we saw it become a factor in a custody dispute, really with questions on whether or not she was going to be able to be a good caregiver for the children as she was rehabilitating herself as well. So even with temporary disabilities, and both temporary and permanent disabilities, we see exploiting the disability to try to gain control over that individual or over the children as a tactic of abuse, which also goes into exploiting privilege. I saw a case a couple years back where an abuser just up and moved them. He bought a new house that was not accessible at all. He got rid of the accessible van that they had been driven so that she basically was very limited in her accessibility and increased her accessibility needs dramatically after that. And denying abuse, blaming disability as a cause of abuse is something that we see frequently, unfortunately. We, as Samantha described, the myths around abuse, there's a very common misperception that stress or alcoholism and different things like that cause abuse versus it really being a choice of somebody to maintain power and control over somebody else and to abuse them in these ways. And often when it comes to individuals with disabilities, it may be an intimate partner or it may be a caregiver or it may be an intimate partner who is a caregiver. And in those cases, we sometimes see the use of caregiver stress as an excuse for an abuse. And we absolutely believe that is not okay, that there's never an excuse for abuse, and stress is not does not cause abuse, that people make a decision to be abusive. I mentioned before assistive technology. This is something that our project, the Safety Net Project at the National Network to End Domestic Violence, looks a lot at ways that people with disabilities and who are deaf utilize assistive technologies in order to communicate. And understanding how abusers can misuse those tools is really important for somebody who wants to be able to communicate with somebody else about the abuse that they're experiencing, and about how they can become safe and maintain their safety once they have left an abusive person. We've seen cases where an abuser has impersonated a survivor over a TTY, trying to get a prosecutor to drop charges. We've seen cases where abusive individuals have contacted cell phone providers and really exploited the person's disability, saying, my girlfriend is deaf, she asked me to call on her behalf, can you give me some information? And unfortunately, representatives at the cell phone company who aren't that educated about disabilities often give away information that they shouldn't be giving. We've also seen abusers pack up communication devices that are vital for people, like a TTY device or their phone or whatever it is that they use, pack it up and take it away. Take it away with them when they go to work, so the person doesn't have access to it when the abuser's not around. We've seen a lot of tactics like that, and it's also important to realize that some of the assistive technology isn't always built in a way that always allows individuals with disabilities to best communicate the abuse that's being perpetrated upon them. We've seen a lot of communication boards, for example, that have been developed that people with limited ability to speak to somebody can, use that communication board to tell somebody their needs. However, they're often missing words and images and things that represent types of abuse and make it very difficult for somebody to be able to communicate the abuse that they're experiencing in order to get help. So the ways that the assistive technology can be used strategically to help individuals to gain access to services and maintain their safety once they've left is really important to understand, as well as the ways that people misuse them as a tactic of abuse. The slide on navigating the community, slide 14, these are pieces that when we do trainings for advocates who work with survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking, these are pieces of challenges that survivors with disabilities often face that we want advocates to understand. That the barriers might include additional things that people without disabilities sometimes don't have to worry about. I used to do trainings where we would do a demo over a relay service, and during one of our demos, we had a mock call basically between an abuser and a survivor. And during one of our demos, the relay service interpreter jumped in and started saying things to the abusive person that I was not saying at all. And it became very clear to us that, although a lot of these services, such as relay services, are extremely vital, how important it can be to make sure that advocates are able to meet with individuals in person, because not having a one-on-one and relying on a third party can be a barrier. It can be a barrier to being able to communicate exactly what's happening. It can be a challenge, and it can cause a lot of additional privacy concerns for individuals who are looking to seek services. So there are a lot of additional things that individuals working with survivors need to understand, and that's what our program really tries to do in reaching out to programs and communities who are working with survivors. There's a number of resources that we have on our website, and I know that Samantha can talk about her website as well and the resources that they provide. On the website that I've given on the last slide here, we have a ton of different handouts and materials that can be very interesting for individuals. We have pieces about safety with assistive technology devices, and pieces about safety with other type of technologies that we often see misused by abusers that aren't necessarily specific to people with disabilities, but are very much used by people with and without disabilities, like computer monitoring software and things like that. So we often see abusers misusing that so they can track things, all communication that somebody's doing on their computer. It's important for survivors to understand how to communicate safely when they do want to reach out for help, whether it's to a domestic violence program, a sexual assault program, an attorney, police officers, a disability advocacy organization. It's important to be able to communicate in a safe and private way. And we have a lot of handouts on our website that try to address that. And we don't provide direct service, but we're absolutely available to answer questions and to link individuals to programs when needed. Samantha, did you want to talk a little bit about the resources that you have?
Yes, on our website, dviforwomen.org, you can find quite a bit of information. Now, let me back up. Our organization provides direct client services to residents within the state of Colorado. We service the entire state of Colorado. So if you are a victim survivor that needs some direct services, we can assist with that if you reside in Colorado. However, we also provide information and resources and referrals to people outside of the state of Colorado. So if you are a victim survivor with a disability and you need help, you can contact us via our website. Any information that you want to send or emails that you want to send, you can send it to us directly from our website. And one of our advocates will get the information immediately to our emails, and we will make contact with you that way. Also on our website is different resources and referrals locally in the state of Colorado and nationally. And our phone number, how you can contact us, again, is available as well, and we can answer questions via the telephone. As direct services, we do not have a lot of clients that actually come to our office. The address is not disclosed. We actually meet the client where they are and, of course, utilizing safety precautions. We provide court accompaniment, medical accompaniment, comprehensive case management services, comprehensive crisis intervention services, crisis counseling, helping with food and clothing, rental assistance, whatever your need is, we pretty much can assist. And if we are not able to provide certain things, then we act as an advocate and the middle person for our client to go through another organization or agency for additional services.
Okay, great. Are there any final thoughts or anything you'd like to add from either Samantha or Erica?
I would like to add that while we're discussing abuse among victims, there is a clear difference in in a victim without a disability versus a victim with disabilities. The people that we serve, that we assist, have disabilities. And when I use the word disability, it's a very broad word, disability. So depression, PTSD, when you hear disability, I would like for you to kind of change your way of thinking. If you could change the way you look at things, then the things you look at begin to change. So when you hear disability, it's not just someone in a wheelchair. It's not just someone with a severe case of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, where it's completely obvious. People with disabilities is a culture within themselves. And so if you are on the call and you're with an agency and you are with the domestic violence agency or mental health agency or so on and so forth, and you're providing services, just please be mindful that if you're servicing someone with a disability or multiple disabilities, if there is an issue of comorbidity, just remember that they are a part of a culture as well. And you have to be very compassionate and provide a little bit more attention and time into understanding what that client or victim may be facing as opposed to someone that does not have a disability.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Samantha, and I'd like to piggyback just a little bit from a national perspective. You know, there are over 2,500 local domestic violence programs across the United States. Unfortunately, not all of them by any means are fully accessible or even really fully understand disabilities to the extent of Samantha's program, there are a lot of very specialized programs that have advanced programs and projects that have allowed them to really to grow in their expertise and their availability of services. However, it's important to know the rights of individuals with disabilities and that they deserve to be able to be received by programs. I know that we often see kind of a battle happening in communities where when the individual has a disability and is connected to any sort of disability service provider, sometimes the domestic violence service providers think that the disability service agency is going to handle a little bit more, provide some additional support in the areas of abuse. And sometimes the disability service provider assumes that that's the job of the domestic violence program. And sometimes we don't see as much of a coordination between those services as there should be. So I definitely encourage folks on the phone that if you are in a community where those organizations are not communicating and not really working together to enhance services for survivors with disabilities, I encourage you to try to get those conversations going. And we're here. We can definitely help with that as much as possible. There's often misunderstandings in a lot of programs about what they have to do to be able to provide services. And people with disabilities have a right to receive services from programs regardless of how accessible or inaccessible their programs are. I would like to say, too, that often we see majority of programs that we are working with very much want to be able to serve individuals with disabilities, as Samantha said, across the board, regardless of the type of disability. They want to be able to provide comprehensive services, but they are struggling to do that, whether it means financially becoming fully physically accessible, or if it's becoming attitudinally accessible because the advocates haven't worked with certain disabilities before and they just don't fully understand. So I encourage anyone who is working with somebody with disability or anyone who has a disability to really to speak, about what your needs are and to help individuals understand those, because they might not automatically, unfortunately. Like I said, not all programs are as advanced and as specialized as Samantha's. And so hopefully we'll get there someday where we'll see that with all of our programs, but definitely advocate for yourself and advocate for each other, and definitely get those communications going in those communities, because it'll help.
I did want to add one more thing, and I'm so glad you brought something up that brought to mind, Erica. We also deal with clients that were not disabled prior to receiving services or prior to the abuse. Well, we do have a significant amount of clients who become disabled due to the victimization. We also have some clients, for instance, one who is now, or who had a procedure and was discovering to learn that she was going to be blind within a matter of days, and was also a survivor and in her 40s, and was afraid to death of what to do and what that would look like. So in those cases, again, just agreeing with Erica, making sure that you are linking and developing relationships with other agencies, with other people that can provide you help, and don't ever stop asking for help until you get it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you. We've often seen a lot of times when survivors have acquired a disability because of the abuse, that one organization is helping somebody to understand how to maneuver and navigate their life with this newly acquired disability. The other organization is trying to help the person overcome the trauma of the violence that they experienced. And if they're not working together, that can be really difficult for survivors. And we've often heard that feedback from those individuals. So that's a really, really very, very good point to make. Thank you.
I have a question that someone typed here. I just wanted to pose to you. How can we help a friend who we suspect is being abused? Should we contact an organization or just pass on information?
Well, there's a couple of ways to handle this. But now first, let me say that one of the first things to remember, one of our philosophies here is that we do not encourage or tell someone they should leave a situation. Our job is to, when they're ready, is to make sure that they have the tools and resources that they need. So when they're ready, they know where to go. They know what to do. They know how to find who they need to find or what agency they need to be connected to. As a friend, there's a fine line there because this is a friend, I'm assuming, who's being abused and you love them. And as a friend, you tell them to leave the situation. Oftentimes, where it may appear that will help, actually is making the situation even more difficult, and in most cases causing the victim to stay. Because, again, in the slide that states some of the fears, it's that fear of shame and guilt and embarrassment of what other people would think, the people that I love, the people that have told me time and time again, this person isn't good for me, this person is going to harm me, and it happens. So I feel even more ashamed as an abused woman to go to my friends or even hear my friends say, you need to leave out of this situation. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah.
So what I would suggest is, in casual conversation, when you get a chance, is remember your active listening skills, remember your interpersonal communication skills, listen and watch for nonverbal communication. Look for the signs. You know when your friend needs help. Listen to, say the conversations where your friend might say, I have a friend who is. What should I tell my friend to do? Those certain things. Look at the body language. You're going to know if she's frightened and scared for her life. If she's an elderly person and has a caregiver, if the abuser is a caregiver, you're going to know, okay, I can't do it this way. I need to step in and call Adult Protective Services. But you're also going to know if, okay, she's obviously not ready, but let me make sure that she knows that I have the resources and tools to help her get to where she needs to be when she's ready.
Yeah. Those are all really good points. And I'd like to also add, too, that's something that I feel very strongly about, too, is be careful to not criticize the abusive individual too quickly. A lot of times when survivors start to speak about the abuse that they're experiencing, it's a very confusing place. And in many cases, and I would say most cases of domestic violence, the violence and the abuse is not the entire relationship. Mm-hmm. It's not how the relationship started, and it's often not representative of the entire relationship. And so you might have somebody who's been with an individual for a very long time, who, they're a family member and they're a caregiver or they're an intimate partner, and they've had a wonderful relationship for the majority of time. But there are these things. There are these things that are happening. Abuse tends to escalate and become more severe over time. So often, again, the relationship that the survivor has with the abusive individual could be 90% perfectly fine and something even wonderful for them. But then, what is sometimes emotionally abusive, maybe some name calling, eventually can turn into some, a push, a shove, a slap. And as Samantha had talked about, often it can be followed with a very sincere apology. And people really struggle with what is happening in that relationship, because here is somebody that you care very deeply for, and the majority of relationship is fine, but there's these aspects of it that don't feel right and aren't right. So it's important that when survivors first start speaking to friends and family, or that when you are going to approach somebody that you believe is being abused, to not necessarily come down really hard and start calling that caregiver or that intimate partner of theirs names or whatever. There's a big difference between saying really critical things about that person and their relationship versus saying you don't deserve to be abused. You know, you deserve to be treated with respect all the time. You know, and that doesn't sound like it's okay. You know, I don't believe that should be happening to you. There's a difference in that, and it really can help somebody go through that emotional confusion of separating themselves and deciding that they don't want to be part of that relationship anymore, because that's definitely a difficult decision to make. If you're not familiar with domestic violence and sexual assault, stalking, and these issues either, I would definitely encourage folks to learn more. There's a lot of information online, and I would encourage people about the dynamics of abuse. I posted a link down in the chat to a piece that the National Domestic Violence Hotline has specifically about how I can help a friend or a family member who is being abused. So I think that it's really helpful to gain some additional information and to really understand the dynamics and to overcome the myths and misconceptions about abuse before trying to really intervene and talk to somebody about what they might be experiencing.
And also remembering, as a friend, taking care to make sure that you're taken care of as well while you're trying to take care of your friend, because if you're not careful, you can become caught up in the cycle of vicarious trauma, which I'm sure will be discussed on another day.
I wanted to thank you all for being a part of this first session. I want to thank Samantha and Erica for providing your expertise and information. I want to thank Susie, our interpreter, for being here. The information provided does not replace any type of medical advice. You should always talk to your own doctor for the medical advice that's best for you. I wanted to also just say a few resources. You see it on your screen, but if you need further support, a great hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE, which is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And on the 15th slide, as you can all see, there's other resources for you. Our website that outlines all the sessions is facebook.com/preventviolence, and there's a link there. It says webinar dates and details. If you'd like to contact our organization, our email is info@friendshealthconnection.org, and our website is friendshealthconnection.org. I hope that this information is helpful to you, and I want to thank Erica and Samantha not only for being here, but for touching the lives of so many on a daily basis. You're both very special. You work with outstanding organizations, and I want to thank you for dedicating your life to enriching and helping and saving the lives of others. So thank you so much for everything you are and everything you do on a daily basis. And thank you again for tuning in. This is going to end our first session. So thank you all. Have a great day. And I hope you join us for future sessions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.